friends, welcome to the show Talk with Your Doc. I'm Dr. Prashant A, and our guest for today is Dr. Stephen Fonso. He is a chiropractor and author or a writer here practicing in Thunder Bay, Ontario. And our talk for today is about intermittent fasting. Fasting has been practiced across many countries and many cultures, and it is a very ancient tradition. Fasting is a science, and there are many advantages or benefits of fasting. There are many methods of fasting and the science of fasting. So Dr. Stephen Fonso is going to guide us about the science of intermittent fasting. Thank you, Stephen, for coming to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Please tell us about intermittent fasting. What is it?
Well, intermittent fasting is kind of a spin-off of some traditional ways of fasting, where in traditions there used to be prolonged fasting of sometimes 7, 10, even up to 30 days, 41 days. But what we've done is being able to take some of the benefits of some of those longer fasting and infuse it a little bit more into our lifestyle. So how do we use intermittent fasting? How do we use fasting as a daily application to be able to benefit and receive the benefits from what fasting can do, but how do we infuse that into our daily life? So it's a daily mode of going about
daily
fasting.
fasting.
Daily fasting, yes.
So what does intermittent mean?
Intermittent means is that there's basically you're moving through two cycles. One is through a feeding cycle where you consume food, and then the second cycle is a fasting cycle or a rest cycle for your digestion. So you're focusing on both of those, both the feeding times and then the fasting times.
So are there any particular set of timings we eat, like say we eat in the morning, then in the afternoon, and then we don't eat anything? How does it work?
Yeah, so there's different schools of thought on that. Some people will alternate day fast, meaning that they take a day off of eating, like 24 hours, and then they'll eat the following day. Then they'll take another day off and eat the following day, and they'll do it that way, intermittent, say throughout the week. For daily fasting, we look at, oftentimes you start with a 16-hour fast and then an 8-hour eating window, which is probably for the Western culture, the easiest way to enter into the fasting of intermittent fasting is through a cycle of 8 hours of eating and 16 hours of fasting. But just to let you know that it's not 8 hours of constant eating, it's just a window where you can consume food, and then outside of that window you rest and relax.
So you eat at certain time and then you fast for certain time of the day and you decide the time.
Yes.
Now my question is, what are the advantages of this intermittent fasting? Say you ate in the morning, say 9 o'clock, you have a breakfast or lunch or brunch, and then you have another dinner at 4 o'clock, and then there is 16 hours of fasting.
Yes.
So what happens in our body? What is the advantage of it?
Yeah, well, there's a few schools of thought, but one thing that they're noting is that it allows, number one, for our insulin to be lowered, which is nice because that gives our cells a rest, especially with things like diabetes and blood sugar challenges that we have in our culture. It gives the body an insulin rest and a blood sugar rest. So it allows a resting cycle, and that helps to replenish energy in the body.
So when you eat, the body releases insulin.
Yes.
And when you don't eat, the insulin is not released.
Correct.
So is that beneficial for your health?
That is beneficial because if the body's constantly inundated with insulin, it creates insulin problems and cellular problems in the body, and oftentimes when those cells get full of sugar and there's no room to go, now the body kicks sugars to increase in the bloodstream, and it creates problems that way. So by giving the body a rest, it allows us to utilize a different source of energy, which is very much promoted in intermittent fasting. To use a different source of energy, give your body a longer rest cycle so that we can use something else for our energy, like fats to fuel our body, as opposed to just sugars alone.
So when we are not eating for a prolonged period of time, which has to be minimum 12 hours, 16 hours?
Minimum of 12, but they're still suggesting if you can push it towards that 16-hour cycle, it seems to derive some better benefits. 12 hours seems to be where you just kind of turn the switch between using sugar to using fat, that 12-hour cycle. But if you can push it a little bit longer, now your body's going in a longer window of using fat for fuel and for energy.
So after 12 to 16 hours of fasting, that's when the fat metabolism kicks in.
Correct.
and that's when you start using the fat. So it's good for losing the weight probably.
It's great for losing weight. People that have been struggling with weight for periods of time, it's definitely a pretty effortless, what we found in our practice, a pretty effortless way for people to start to lose some pounds and some weight and to burn more fat, for sure.
With the intermittent fasting.
With the intermittent fasting, yeah. I mean, you know, eating there's a lot of behavior modification to that. And in that, it becomes an easier behavior modification to just stretch the window of when you start eating. And that gap of 3 or 4 hour stretch has a profound impact on what kind of fat that you're burning in your body for energy.
So when you are eating, say you're eating 2 times in a daytime at the interval of 8 hours, and then you have a 16 hours of fasting. So when you are eating, you can eat anything and everything, or their food has to be restricted?
Well, there's schools of thought. One, if you're health oriented, you're obviously going to be mindful of what you're taking in during that time. If you're looking at solely at weight loss per se, you can be a little more flexible with what you're eating during that 8 hour window time. They have done some studies with rats and monkeys both, and they found that they could essentially eat a larger amount of calories during that 8 hour window if they do a 16-hour fast. The thing is if we want to be health conscious, I think regardless of the cycle of eating pattern, you want to be aware and mindful of what's going in your body, since that's part of what's creating your physical body is what you're eating. And so we still hold the idea that if you're wanting to be healthy, on top of losing some weight, then you got to be mindful of what's going in. So a high diet of vegetables, of course, and protein sources. If you're vegetarian, you're looking at beans or legumes or other sources like that. If you do eat meat, then you look at maybe some lighter proteins like fish or some other things like that. So yeah, we still care about quality essentially, because that's a predictor of our health.
Right.
And at the same time, you can be mindful of the quantity that's going in through the intermittent fasting.
So calorie restriction, if you want to lose the weight, one has to watch the calories, even they are eating 2 times a day and then having a 16 hours of fast.
There appears to be still a little bit more flexibility. Yeah, there is some degree of flexibility. I wouldn't say that you want to go and eat 8,000 calories worth of food in that 8 hour window. But there is a little window of flexibility because you are giving yourself a little more fat burning time. But you still, you still want to be mindful. And I think part of any healthy eating cycle or behavior still comes from awareness. So you still want to build and cultivate your awareness of what's going in your body. You want to be mindful of your body and what you're doing. So I still put awareness even though you can put rules in, to me, awareness still leads the way as to what you're feeling. How does the food make you feel? Do you feel energized after you're eating or not? And it's a good feedback to let you know if what you're consuming is matching what your body needs. And so awareness still, to me, is number one.
So what is the best time of fasting?
Well, I can only speak through personal experience. I like a window for my lifestyle between 12 and 8, 12 p.m. to 8 p.m.
12 o'clock, one in the afternoon lunch,
in the
and
afternoon,
then 8 o'clock.
Yeah, afternoon and dinner, essentially, is what we're looking at, with maybe a little snack of some nuts or something like that in between. So that, to me, is a window. I know other people that do a morning. Maybe they'll start eating at 9 or 9:30, 10 o'clock, and they'll because they have an earlier supper. So I don't have the liberty to have an earlier supper at this point in my life. So I got to kind of use intermittent fasting and flexibility, looking at where can I consume my food in an 8 hour cycle. Well, for me, it's easier to do noon to 8 as opposed to something earlier. Yeah.
Okay, we'll take a short break and we'll continue our discussion for the next part. Please stay away for the next part. Thank you. Dear friends, welcome back to the show Talk with Your Doc. Our guest for today is Dr. Stephen Fonso, and we are talking about science of intermittent fasting. Dr. Fonso, we were talking about the time of fasting, and you mentioned that 12 o'clock lunch and then 8 o'clock supper or dinner. Is that timing has to be consistent throughout, or one day morning, one day afternoon? How does that work?
Well, our biology tends to like rhythms. Mucking around with the rhythms too much generally doesn't allow the mind to get into a rhythm and the biology to find a rhythm.
Correct.
So I would definitely suggest that people find a rhythm that tends to match at least 80% of what they can do consistently. Whether that's more of a morning, afternoon, or later afternoon, or whether it's something like I do, that noon to 8, that matches my lifestyle, and I could repeat that regularly for the most part. And so our biology loves rhythm. I mean, look at nature. Nature has rhythms. We have cycles. We have seasons. There's a reason for that, and our biology is part of that, is part of a rhythmic cycle. And so finding the rhythm in the cycle that works for you and matches your life, I feel is important. It allows you to be consistent. And it allows some predictability within your biology and some expectations of, and creating expectations from your biology of when things are coming and going. So I like that component.
So when you are not fasting, what one can eat? All the healthy food, or anything particular, like in between the two, while we are fasting, if we feel hungry, like we had a lunch and then we have dinner, and you feel hungry in between, so what one should eat?
Well, I generally recommend, at least at the beginning, to abstain from it and have some water. Water is a nice thing to kind of fill the digestion. We do some apple cider vinegar and a little bit of water, like some warm apple cider vinegar and water is nice to do. So I tend to recommend for people to stay in a water mindset for the most part. I mean, you can have a black coffee during that time. You can do that. You can do some tea, like a green tea. You can do some warm lemon water. You know, those kind of things definitely can be utilized.
So advantages of fasting. First one, we mentioned weight loss. You know, one can easily lose weight without doing much efforts. What are other advantages? Does it help to control blood sugar in the case of diabetes?
It does help to control blood sugar. I've since, for the last 18 years, I've been really interested in the healing process of the body. And you know, the healing process, at least in the body, we have two general cycles in the body. One is a resting state, like the brake of a car, and then there's the gas pedal, called the sympathetic or fight or flight part of the nervous system. We have these two systems, the gas and the brake. When we initiate more of the brake, meaning that we give our digestion a rest, our digestion is very, very expensive on energy. So when we give that more of a rest, we allow this process to unfold called autophagy. Autophagy is the body's own kind of recycling process, and where it can go and it can track down different metabolites or things, toxins in the body that are produced due to stress. And so it can go in and track some of these things down, and almost like a self-cleansing process that can be induced from a fasting process. If we don't get enough rest time in that eating pattern, then we don't give the body that chance to go in and self-cleanse. And so from a healing perspective, that's where I feel the intermittent fasting and fasting itself can lend a great deal to the healing process. It definitely helps to manage blood sugar. At least the research shows it definitely helps to manage that. It helps to manage the insulin levels. But on top of that, it also promotes a self-cleansing mechanism that I feel is really enticing for this day and age, where we're inundated with tons of chemical stress from food, environmental pollutants, different types of toxins, emotional stress that create heat.
And it saves your time from cooking, right?
And it saves a ton of time, a massive amount of time. So, you know, time and energy, it helps to replenish energy. So, yeah, a lot of benefits that way.
So, if somebody is diabetic, can he or she do fasting, or they have to take a medical advice before they begin the fasting?
Well, I definitely suggest, you know, you want to find a trusted advisor to work with. If you have a health condition that you're working through, I definitely recommend an advisor to be able. We're human beings, and it's good to, you know, work with someone else to make sure that you're within kind of the scope of what your body can do. But we've had people that have gone off their diabetic medication through fasting. You just have to. Part of the trust is that the body will find another source of energy besides sugar.
Correct.
And if you can trust that your body is intelligent and will go find another source of energy, then the necessity to eat small quantities frequently, it becomes less because your body's learning how to kick into a new energy source and not rely just on sugar. There's going to be a little window of maybe discomfort that you have to work through.
Right.
That's why having maybe a mentor or a coach or a physician that ascribes to some of these ideas would be helpful. Yeah.
There's some myths about the fasting. One of the myths is that when you fast, you lose muscle.
Yes.
What do you want to say about that?
Well, I would want to say that it's probably one of the lesser of the evils of fasting over time, in the sense that it hasn't really been shown to degrade muscle tissue. In fact, there's been some ideas that it actually promotes the cleansing of muscle tissue and actually helps to lean muscle tissue instead of having toxins that build up over time due to different workouts. I mean, depending on what your lifestyle is, there's a lot of strain on muscle tissue. And toxins build very easy in muscle tissue. So I'd like to say that it would enhance the quality of your muscle tissue as opposed to losing muscle mass. You're enhancing the quality of your muscle tissue by cleaning the tissue out.
Probably you will lose muscle mass if you fast for a long time. Probably.
For prolonged periods of time, you're going to lose a little. You're going to lose some muscle mass. But for the general population that are doing intermittent fasting, I wouldn't say that's something that you have to concern yourself with at the beginning. No.
One of the concepts about the fasting is ketosis.
Yes.
And they say that ketosis is good for your brain and ketones are good for your health when you are fasting. So do you want to say anything about the ketosis during the fasting?
Well, that addresses another myth about ketosis and that there's dangers around the ketosis. And we've been in what we'd call ketotic states for as long as we've been alive. Any time that we go prolonged, it takes about 2 to 4 days to get into a state of ketosis where you're burning a different fuel than sugar. And that's foreign for a lot of people. So part of it is learning that, hey, ketones aren't, number one, they're not going to kill you. They're part of your body. They're a byproduct of breaking down fats. And as you break down fats, you're going to left with ketones to burn for fuel. So it's a pretty simple process. It's just, again, we have to break through sometimes some cultural myths that we need to burn sugar only from the foods that we eat, that our body has things in there and mechanisms set up. When we don't have sugar, it'll burn something else. And especially part of it is building trust in the body. Yeah.
Yes. And then body get used to the fasting state, and then it becomes a part of your life. Probably.
Yes, so it does. And again, that they suggest it's about a 2 to 4 day window for you to really get into a ketosis state where you're really burning that. And so, but it becomes easier and easier over time to get into that state of fat burning the more often you're doing these things. Yeah, your body learns how to adapt. Right. Yeah.
We'll take a short break and we'll continue our discussion in the next part.
Right.
Please stay back for the last part. Thank you. Friends, welcome back to the show Talk with Your Doc, and our guest for today is Dr. Stephen Fonso. We are talking about intermittent fasting. Dr. Fonso, we were mentioning about ketosis, and it takes a little longer fasting to produce the ketosis. Is there any time frame, like how much longer fasting produces ketosis, like after 20 hours, 24 hours? Or?
Yeah, they're suggesting about 48 to 72 hours to induce this state of ketosis. And just on personal experience, when I've done fasting, it's around the end of day 2 when I did a fast that I seem to kind of kick into a new energy source.
Yes.
And that I understand as my body now burning those ketones for fuel. And it was a different source of energy. It wasn't something that I derived from food because I had been fasting for 48 hours. But I found that there was just a different sort of energy that seemed to ignite in my body, and I was being fueled by a different source.
So is this ketones good for your health?
Well, they're good in the sense that your body's burning something different than sugars. So, and it's learning to go in and use a different source of energy.
Which
so
is fat.
yeah, it's absolutely good. It's good for the body to learn different mechanisms to adapt. If you get too rigid in one way of using energy, we become a slave to that. So it's nice to stretch the body's capabilities to be able to use something different to fuel us in our life.
One of the studies say that one who does intermittent fasting regularly, they have a long life. Longevity is increased, they say.
Yeah, you know, one of the, from what I've read, the amount of calories that we take in our life has been equated to longevity. And the lesser calories we take in, it appears, the longer our lifespan goes. So I would definitely say that intermittent fasting with the general lower calorie intake, because just you're not eating as much, generally speaking, and you're more mindful of what's going in your body, it's associated with a longer lifespan. So it appears as though that lowering that caloric intake is associated with a longer lifespan, and lower caloric intake is generally associated with intermittent fasting.
Right. So advantages of intermittent fasting can be like weight loss, obesity, then sugar control, longer lives,
longer lifespan.
How about lipids, blood lipid levels? It can go down with the fasting?
Well, you want to go back to the source of, is the body designed to regulate itself? Is the body designed to regulate its blood sugars, its insulin levels? Is it designed to regulate its cholesterol levels? The answer is yes, and in fact, it does. So even if you have higher cholesterol levels, your body's still working at regulating that higher cholesterol level because it feels that it needs that. The one thing as you initiate more self-healing and more self-cleansing is the body design, especially as your inflammation goes down, your body's design and need for cholesterol starts to lower. The cholesterol's acted upon under a stress response. Your body elicits cholesterol levels under a stressful response. So whether it's emotional stress or physical stress or toxins, your cholesterol levels are going to naturally be enhanced. So anytime we can reduce the stress levels in the system, the need for cholesterol begins to lower. And so, of course...
so it reduces your cholesterol levels for sure.
Of course it can reduce your cholesterol levels. Yeah.
So now if somebody is accustomed to eating frequent food, frequent snacks in between, how difficult it is for them to start intermittent fasting?
Well, this is the beauty of it. The beauty of it is there's going to be an adjustment period. But any type of behavior change or any type of healing response is going to be associated with some sort of emotional state and mental state that's going to be required to make those adjustments. You're going to be able to adjust as fast as you could emotionally and mentally make the adjustment. The more emotionally tied you are and mentally tied to eating in certain patterns in certain ways, probably the more effort it's going to take to break through that barrier. But if you have an understanding and a vision for your health and you want to be able to move through that, you know you're going to have to work through some emotions. You're going to have to work through some mental blocks and some barriers. But that's life. You know, that's part of life.
It might be mentally difficult, but it's easier to do it probably.
Yeah, there's going to be mental challenges that happen. I mean, when we work with our clients regularly, there's constantly little mental challenges that come up. That's part of any lifestyle or behavior modification is you're going to butt up against these things. And so part of it is, that's why working with someone is helpful because they can help you mitigate through some of the tougher times where you got to work through some of those barricades.
But considering the benefits of fasting, it's worth giving a try for the fasting.
It's absolutely worth giving a try. And I would even say that it's natural. Intermittent fasting is a natural state. Any process you look in the environment, there's times of high rainfall and times of drought. There's times where plants flourish and then there's times where they're not flourishing. And there's high times of nutrients and times of depletion. And so intermittent fasting is a way for us to reconnect even with a natural process that's automatically life itself, which is times of feast and times of fasting. And it's the same thing we're doing in our body.
Is it okay to have a cheat day in between?
Well, I give myself permission to cheat, that's for sure. For sure. And again, that I think with anything in lifestyle, if you have to get too rigid with it, you're going to create your own stresses with that. It's not saying not to be disciplined, but just to have an understanding that if you have a cheat day in there, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's not going to make or break your success. Give yourself permission. Give yourself some self-love if you need to, and give yourself permission to deviate a little bit at times. But what's that 80% rhythm?
Yes.
You know, just focus on that 80%. 20% you're going to screw up on. 20% you're going to fail. 20% you're going to have troubles and difficulties. Focus on that 80%. Nail it 80% of the time, and over the long haul, you're going to succeed.
And while one is fasting, one can continue regular exercise, regular work. There's no problem, right?
Right, and even it's suggested that if you do a little bit of exercise right at the end of your fasting, like at the end of that 16-hour fast, you're going to deplete the liver of glycogen stores, and you're really going to push yourself into that state of using and fat burning even faster. So yeah, you can definitely do that and monitor that. Watch your level of dizziness. It's going to be foreign a little bit to exercise in a fasted state. You can do it, and your body can do it, and it's been doing it for centuries. But it's still foreign for us, and we have to learn. Part of the art of intermittent fasting is learning to trust your body again, and trusting that it can use a source other than sugars. A lot of people think, okay, I got to eat before I exercise, or I got to take some sugars in for fuel. Well, that's a mindset that you're going to have to work through to understand that your body has a source of energy. If you were attacked by a tiger in the middle of the night and you hadn't been eating, your body can find energy to run. Your body can find energy to escape. If your fire alarm went off at 8 in the morning when you hadn't eaten for prolonged periods of time, do you think you could probably find the energy to run out of the house? Absolutely, because that's the way your body's designed. It can do it. It doesn't need to be fed in order to move. So
we have a lot of stored energy. We just need to give a chance to.
We have a ton of stored energy. We need to give it a chance to work for us. And that's part of what intermittent fasting is.
Thank you, Dr. Stephen. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining for the show. Thank you.